Welcome to Art and Web3 as Tools for Social Change, two-part workshop with myself and Duneska. And honestly, where you don't need to know anything about like technology, we're just kind of like lightly flirt with some of these ideas to try to kind of expand minds about what are some of the things that are possible with interacting with this kind of technology. I'll actually start with just explaining who I am, my own background. My name is Stefen Deleveaux. I'm from the Bahamas. My background is economics. I got really interested in technology in general, and kind of always wanted to combine the two a bit. So when fintech started becoming a thing, let's say 2011, 2012, I got really interested in that, mainly because of the narratives of being separate from how most people interact with banks and banking and finance, and also being able to just do it interact in those areas in a much more easy way, in a much more global friendly way. I very quickly realized that that was not true. The narrative was kind of wrong. Fintech generally is still very much tied to the traditional financial system. It's also not exactly global because in the Caribbean, we don't really have much access to those kind of platforms. Even today, Venmo, Cash App, those do not work in the Bahamas at all. They don't work in the Caribbean. I still have no access to those personally. So I kind of was just very disappointed. Was trying to figure out alternatives basically. I had heard about Bitcoin, I think in 2011, 2012. I pretty much ignored it because I thought it was silly. I saw the people that were pushing it, and I was like, oh, this is a bunch of right-wingers who I don't want any interaction with. But years later, I kind of ended up diving deep into the technology itself, the blockchain technology that everyone talks about. And I realized, oh, now that I can kind of grasp what this is, I realized really quickly, this is what I was looking for the entire time. Because one, it is completely separate from the traditional financial system, which was just necessary for me. And then two, it is global by default. Once you have internet access, you pretty much have access to, or you can interact with blockchain, crypto, Web3, et cetera, which means that for me as an individual in the Caribbean, and also for other people in the global South, they could also have access to this without having to interact with the US or Europe, which are always actively pushing a lot of these countries down in the sense of blocking access to things, blocking access to finance, economics, et cetera, et cetera. So after that, a few friends and I ended up starting the Caribbean Blockchain Alliance, which was pretty much focused on advocacy and education in the Caribbean about blockchain technology and what it can, what can come out of it, what it can be used for, et cetera. And through a lot of those actions, this started, let's say late 2016. Through a lot of those actions, the Caribbean has actually come up quite a bit in terms of embracing the technology, trying to utilize it, trying to be involved in that field, in the conversation, in a lot of ways that the US actually isn't. The US SEC, for example, has been pushing against it in a lot of ways. So there's just always been a great opportunity for the Caribbean and for the Global South in general to really interact and start to understand what they can do with it. And it is, it's very new technology still. So even just baby steps is all that's really required in terms of figuring out what people can do with this, how they can interact and operate with this. So how many people are actually familiar with the term Web3? Dope. So won't spend much time on this, but obviously Web3 is basically using the internet while also using blockchains or while also using crypto. So if you think of crypto as strictly peer-to-peer transactions or interactions with money or whatever word you want to use for money, Web3 is more of using the same thing, but in the same way that you use the internet. So you can go to a website, there'll be a wallet connect or something that you can connect your crypto wallet to, and then that will allow you to do certain things on these specific websites or on these apps. And that again could just mean doing a transaction with somebody else or buying something through a website that maybe you can't use a credit card for whatever reason, but you can do it through a specific cryptocurrency, for example. And some of the things that people talk about when they talk about blockchain, when they talk about crypto, is all these buzzwords, right? You have the decentralized aspect, meaning that there's no one person or no one company that's in control. It is decentralized. There are a lot of different people who are involved in it. And actually, to go back to it, the reason Bitcoin was invented to start with was, so say you're paying somebody or you're buying something. It feels like it's just a transaction between you and the person, but it's actually not. It's actually, you have the banks in the middle, you have fintech or payment companies in the middle, whether it's a credit card or whether it's like Venmo or whatever, there's always a company or some agency or some like middleman in the middle that helps you get from one person to the next. But of course, if you're, if you don't want to mess with banks or you don't want to deal with like capitalist companies, for example, the point of all of this to begin with was to take that away, was to make sure that all of your transactions could be, or whatever transaction you wanted, could actually be from one person directly to the next. So the entire point of this was to take the middleman out. And that's also where the decentralized aspect comes from. It's also transparent. There's never any question about where did this money go? Did this person receive the money or not? Because you can actually follow up by looking at the chain itself. Again, user controlled, which is the same thing. Censorship resistant, which just means that, again, nobody can stop you from interacting. No government or no bank or no company or corporation can say like, oh no, you can't do this, because you have the power to do it. So it's very much an empowerment play, and it's all about making sure that any random individual has access to something. And access really is one of the most important things at the end of the day, because again, even with the fintech stuff, it ends up locking people out of the global economy in a way that is not possible with blockchains and crypto, because then anyone can access. Again, accessible to everyone. Yeah, that's the basic of it. Again, not trying to go too deep into technical stuff, but actually, so I don't know if anyone has actually experienced this. I know Diana has, but it's interesting because I've always seen this tech as a very empowering, or at least potentially empowering technology, one that allows everyday people to organize or at least interact with each other in a very anti-capitalist way, in a very potentially socialist way. But what's interesting is that people who have been interacting with the space in a long time, they've gotten a lot of pushback. They've gotten a lot of hate from people who, I'll give an example. So this is an NFT gallery, so people are familiar with NFTs. So there have actually been a lot of interesting interactions, and especially in terms of marginalized communities, BIPOC, LGBT, sex workers have actually been using crypto for a very long time. And especially in the global south, there's a lot of people using crypto, a lot of people using NFTs. And that has been such a game changer to them. And actually, it's saved a lot of people's lives. But then at the same time, you'll see quote unquote progressives and quote unquote leftists, mostly in the US, who actually hate crypto because they've been told a lot of different narratives and they don't understand, or maybe don't care about these people in these marginalized communities that have been using it to help them. And I just added this because I thought it was hilarious. This person saying like, they don't care that sex workers use NFTs and they will abandon all their principles just to hate on it. And this is actually something that I've seen a lot, pretty much just people online kind of just being ridiculous. But I've always found that interesting because these are people who claim to be leftists or claim to be socialists, but when it comes to solidarity, it's completely lacking. Like they don't even care because they've just been told to hate these things. But I mean, I've seen myself in real time, like all of these interactions, again, especially in the global south, where, for example, this was a few years back. I don't know if anyone remembers in Nigeria, there was a huge protest against police brutality. It got really, really massive. And then very quickly, their government, they started shutting down banks, shutting down payment platforms. So basically, all the protesters, they had no access to funds, no access to the organizations that were helping, maybe donations or organizing and things like that, because there was, again, no access to money. So even the people who were trying to raise funds for it couldn't donate it or get it to the people. So what did people do? They turned to crypto. And what they were able to do with that, all the organizations that were funding them, they were able to transact their funds into crypto and get it to the people. And then the people started interacting with crypto peer-to-peer with each other. And that actually supercharged what they were able to do while these protests were happening, and making sure that no matter what what the government did or what the police did, they always had this kind of access to payments, to transactions, et cetera. So this was actually huge for them. And I guess there's so many examples of this, but another example was actually in Afghanistan. And it's interesting because, sorry, it's a lot of text. But what's interesting in Afghanistan, for example, a lot of times young women are not allowed to work, and sometimes they're not even allowed to hold the money. So if a man comes and sees a young woman with money, he will actually steal it from them, and it's legal. So we've definitely seen a lot of organizations pop up in Afghanistan where they actually help young women to get work. They help young women to actually transact in Bitcoin or some other crypto, so that nobody can take that away from them. Because if you have cash in your pocket, someone can steal that. But if you have access to a digital currency, no one can take that from you. Especially if you're just holding it for use later, it's much harder for someone to actually get that from you. And then at the same time, we've also seen, when the Taliban had a resurgence, a lot of women used Bitcoin and other types of crypto to escape when they were being captured and whatnot. So it's actually, when I say it's actually life-changing and life-saving, we've seen so many examples of that. And again, that's something that is pretty much everywhere in the global south. Not as much in the US, just because US, there's more of an access per se, but understanding how important this has been for access to funding, payments, organizing in organizations in general, you can start to see okay, how can we use this no matter where we are for individual empowerment and being able to have communities and societies come together and interact with each other. So this is kind of where the community aspect comes in, because obviously when it comes to crypto, the main thing is just payments, but there's also this kind of idea about community interaction and coordination. So this is a quote from Yanis Varoufakis, who's a Marxist economist, also former Minister of Finance of Greece. But even he said, because he was very anti-crypto at the beginning, but after looking into the technology, he was like, oh, I could actually see the use of this technology being really important for a kind of democratized economy or a kind of socialism at the end of the day. But what does that actually look like? So again, these are just kind of ideas, but there's a lot of potential in terms of what people do when they actually start using it. Are people familiar with the term dual power? So dual power is basically just the idea of communities coming together to organize, but also to gain not just political power, but also economic power. And it's called dual power because I don't remember who coined it, but the idea is basically they want to push both forms of power at the same time, because only then is true liberation actually possible. Because it's not just about the political power that helps in some ways, and it's not just about the economic power that helps in some ways, but when you combine them together, that's when you can actually get to this point of empowerment and liberation. And this also, again, ties into whether it's an entire nation or whether it's just a small community. No matter what the scale is, any community or whoever can actually gain power through organizing. At the end of the day, it all comes back to organizing. And just one idea: there's a lot of focus right now about blockchain and mutual aid and global mutual aid networks. And it's interesting because, so I actually studied cooperatives in college, and one of the biggest issues with cooperatives is that it's hard for them to scale. They're very empowering in a lot of ways. They allow workers to organize well. They allow workers to kind of own an organization or a company or whatever together, and allows them to have their own kind of worker democracy at the same time, because they can vote on certain things, but it all comes down to the workers. But the hard part there is because of the specific structure, it's hard for them to scale. And now we're starting to see cooperatives and like cooperative type of organizations use blockchain to organize a bit more. And that gives them, because blockchains are global by default, it gives them access to so many more, whether it's other people working online or people who want to fund and provide value to the cooperatives. It just makes that easier. And this is something that we're starting to see now, and I think there's a lot of potential for that as well. And it also ties into mutual aid networks, where we can build local, national, global mutual aid networks through this use of blockchain, because again, you can have this kind of payment circle where people are interacting or funding or whatever. And you can also have, I'll get into that a bit later, but you can also have this idea of people coordinating, voting, doing things that cooperatives do already, but doing it on chain. And I'll explain a little more later. This is one example of a current example. A friend of mine's launched PackDAO, which is a New York, mainly Brooklyn-based mutual aid collective, and they've been using blockchain to, support their community basically. And they raise funds through crypto. They organize through blockchain interactions, and they also have this kind of voting aspect online as well. I mean, on chain as well. And then this is kind of, and I realized I didn't explain DAO. So we don't need to go into what a DAO is, but it stands for a decentralized autonomous organization. But it's really just a co-op that resides fully on the blockchain. And again, it's like you can fund it through crypto, you can send payments through crypto, and you can actually, and people are voting and making decisions and doing actual governance through blockchain technology. And what that allows is that you can actually set things up with certain apps where, let's say everyone in here is voting on something. You can vote online through like on chain. And once that vote goes in, it can be automatically executed, meaning that, you don't need someone to sit in the middle and actually push something forward. You can make sure that all of you, once a decision is made, it happens automatically. And you can also have what we call multi-sigs, which are basically wallets that a lot of people can interact with at the same time. And what that allows is that, you don't have to rely on one person to maybe donate or distribute money or distribute funding or guard the treasury. It just allows, what's the best way to put this? It removes the risk of, having a treasurer that, if there's a lack of trust for whatever reason, or if one person runs away with the money, you can't do that with a multi-sig. You have to have consensus. You have to have at least multiple people say, okay, we do want this to happen. It just adds more checks and balances at the end of the day. And having this on-chain just allows for that. So the DAO thing is really interesting for organizing in general, because again, whether it's just a few people, whether it's a lot of people, it kind of shifts the way that people interact, and it also gives kind of a sense of autonomy. Oh, okay. So to kind of, I guess, finalize all this, there's a lot of projects right now that are focused on whether it's really just focused on giving communities tools to empower themselves and to interact in a way that's a bit more democratic, a bit more permissionless, a bit better to operate at scale at the same time. Whether that's community activations, grant programs. There's a lot of grant programs that are coming up that once you can set something up really easily, you can have your community be funded through this kind of voting platform where other people can interact in that kind of way as well. And again, this is all just like lightly touching on some of the ideas. Didn't want to go too deep into it, but there are a lot of projects right now that are focused on. So for example, Colectivo, I wanted to shout them out. They're based in Curacao in the Caribbean, and they're using some of these DAOs and some of this like on-chain activity to help with, you know, regenerative agriculture, food forests, and they're interacting with their own local communities, but also bringing a lot of international communities in and kind of connecting the dots so they can all help each other and provide for each other. And I think that's just incredibly fascinating. And I think we're gonna see a lot more of that. This is all just the beginning. And I think through this technology, we're gonna see just so many things come out of it and so many things that will help us out in a way that has never happened before. But that's it.
Hi everyone, I'm Duneska, and welcome to the second part of today's workshop, which is art as a tool for social change. So one way to define art is as the application of human imagination, right? So what if we use our imagination to conjure up a world that upholds notions of fairness, reciprocity, and equilibrium, right? Some people might ask, are there examples of this already? Does this already exist? And what I want to ask you guys first is, what are you noticing in the two images that we are currently looking at? Like, you can just say whatever is coming to mind.
People growing stuff in tires.
Absolutely.
Collecting bubbles, perhaps. One is a garden, one is garbage.
Mm-hmm.
Looks like people are trying to reuse objects.
Great. Anyone else? Cool. So these are great observations, right? And I think it's funny working with adults too, because we tend to make deductions, not make observations. Like y'all have already created narratives, right? So this is the Luisa Cáceras Commune in Venezuela. So these are all images from this commune. And the Luisa Cáceras Commune is a socialist commune that was named after Luisa Cáceras de Arismendi, who's a 14-year-old patriot that disarmed and shot her royalist captors in the struggle for independence. So prior to the Luisa Cáceras communes, Venezuela understood that there were three kinds of communes. There was rural communes, which grow food, crops, or raise cattle. Then there's Andean communes, which tend to cultivate coffee, as well as seaside communes who focus on fishing. So now I want to ask y'all, maybe for your thoughts, what would a socialist commune do in the middle of Barcelona, one of Venezuela's most urban, busiest cities? What kinds of things do you guys think that they would do to gather revenue, rather, based on what y'all know about cities?
I mean, we saw bottles in the first photos, perhaps some sort of like a recycling program.
Does anyone agree, disagree? What are y'all thinking? There's mostly agreement. Great. So initially, this commune, the Luisa Cáceras commune, focused on processing corn flour, because it's so common in Venezuela, especially when you think of arepas, hallacas, and empanadas and bollos, right? But obviously that didn't work out. So I want to ask you guys, why do you think that wouldn't work out? Why would producing corn flour not necessarily do well for them in the middle of a city?
There's already so many corn flour manufacturers.
Good job. So proud of you. Like, yes, exactly. So unfortunately, they found that they couldn't compete with these larger companies, the larger corn flour companies. But I have this quote here from Carlos Herrera, who's a communard, and he mentioned even though they lost the battle to selling corn flour, they learned in the process about supply chains and the need to plan their undertakings, right? So what Carlos Herrera and the rest of the communards understood is praxis makes perfect, right? And praxis is the application of theory in material ways. So they used their newfound knowledge and applied it, after the mayor of Barcelona at the time, Luis Marcano, gave them the responsibility to collect garbage, right? So y'all were not far off. And the Luisa Cáceres Commune decided to be responsible for their entire process, because what they realized through making corn flour is that if you are not responsible and in control of the entire process, you can fall victim to these larger corporations. So in the Luisa Cáceres Socialist Commune, they got a garbage truck and they named him Lucho. And I want to ask you guys, why do you guys think that it would be important that they would give this garbage truck a name? Why would they choose to do that? Mm-hmm.
Also, maybe like Lucho is a part of their community as well. So,
There's multiple reasons.
yeah.
And
Things helps bring ownership.
yeah, this was great. Y'all gave 3 amazing reasons as to why that they would do that, right? So naming their garbage truck gave it a personality, which in turn allowed for commune members and community members to not only understand this garbage truck as a part of their society, but also pay respect to it and feel like this is something worth honoring, right? So it was this and the fact that their minimal overhead was covered by social services that allowed for them to have a really strong moral economy, which is a system of economy or a way of relating with each other that isn't necessarily only placed on economic value, but also how we interact with each other, how we view the things in our lives, how we view the people in our lives, right? This is all a part of the process. So unlike the Eastern Bloc in the 20th century, which included the USSR, this commune was self-governed, right? So this was really just pivotal in terms of like how they went through their lives as a socialist commune, because it allowed for them to reap the benefits of their successes and also feel their areas in which they could improve, right, directly. So this was not the case for other communes who were assigned garbage collection by Luis Marcano, because they weren't responsible for every aspect of collecting garbage. So whether or not the truck was rented, or maybe there were larger companies that were recycling the materials, there were other people involved, which made it really easy for them to just not feel the success in this process. So recycling material, metal, and plastics, like Valerie mentioned earlier, also became another source of income, right? So it wasn't just about managing the garbage, but also generating revenue from that as well. And reducing became a necessity due to the blockade. So you kind of mentioned that earlier too as well, Stefen. The blockade meaning that they weren't given certain resources, they weren't allowed to trade in the same way that like we are in the US, right? So these things became pivotal for them. They weren't just sort of these general understandings of what they should do in the way that we would understand in the global north. It was important for their livelihood, for them to recycle, reuse, and reduce. They even applied reuse to contribute to a plant nursery in their community. So what you guys were seeing earlier with the tires and the plants that were coming out of the tires, they actually placed those very intentionally in certain areas where people would generally throw garbage, as to dissuade from them doing that. So the Luis Cáceres commune serves as an example of how a socially integrated ecology can become or can go beyond merely symbolic, right? So we're seeing this object behind them, right? What are we noticing in this wall behind them? What are we generally noticing? Huh?
A lot of colors.
A lot of colors. Yeah, what are we noticing about the human figures and animals? They're workers. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm not actually sure what these are. So that's a great question. Yeah, I'll look into that. Right, so we're noticing a mural, right? That's depicting workers. We're seeing a lot of colors. We're seeing people who are different from each other. And we're also seeing animals and important crops, right? We're seeing corn being depicted as well. This is important for me to mention because it shows the power of art in terms of how to celebrate a community. They're not depicting presidents. They're not depicting these large figures that we're seeing in media, right? They're depicting people, folks that they resonate with, folks that mean something to them directly, and things that mean something to them directly, such as animals and food and things of that nature. And the person in the middle is Luisa Cáceras. So also she's very pivotal for them. So that transitions really smoothly into talking about Faith Ringold and her work, and just thinking about the role that art can play in imagining a future that we desire, right? Specifically for Faith Ringold, she's from Harlem, and she was living in Harlem during a time of tremendous gentrification, tremendous change, shift. And if you guys have ever read the children's book Tar Beach, you'll notice that a lot of it is in response to her father being a worker but not being able to own property in the place that he's from, right, which is Harlem. And we're seeing that in her quilts, how she depicts these characters who are people that she's familiar with, that we may see, that we may feel familiarity with, but they're sort of placed in these positions of tremendous power, like flying over the George Washington Bridge or dancing on the bridge, right? And you can see that in her book Tar Beach as well. Another factor that's really important to mention about Faith Ringold is that she wanted to be a writer, but she was told that she couldn't be, or her books were denied time and time again. So she ended up incorporating writing into her quilts as a way to still be able to enjoy the practice that she loved, right? And she clearly just becomes a really beautiful example of what it means to imagine the world that you desire through art, right? So there's not enough of us here. But if y'all would participate, I think it would be really fun to use collaging, use the materials that we have available to create our own community that is separated into different communes, and what each commune would contribute, what they would choose to do as a way of sustaining themselves. So yeah, here's some examples of the ways in which we can do that. Do y'all want to participate? Beautiful.